What is up, Bitcoin Radio? It's your man, Joe Blackburn, and I'm coming at you today with another awesome episode of Bitcoin Radio here at WBTC, where Bitcoin lives. Well, Bitcoin has been living in the dumps as of today, as I watched, or I guess last night, as we tumbled under 8K. And we kept going all the way down to like 7,200, I think, before it stopped. Hopefully, by the time you listen to this, it's a recovery rather than, and this is old news, which would be fantastic. But that is relative, right? It's always relative to when you got in, what price you got in. But I know this: Bitcoin is still worth a Bitcoin. So that's the great aspect of all of this. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about the news, though. We're going to have Frank Chaparro on. He is the director of news at The Block, and we'll talk about them here momentarily when we bring Frank on. But, you know, I think it's a really relevant conversation that we have where how the real world and how Wall Street and how tech actually views the blockchain, right? You know, one of the major reasons why Bitcoin comes up is because what? New people come in. And Bitcoin's rare. But when you just have a stagnant pool of water full of old water from Bitcoin's glory days, well, you don't really get a lot of excitement from the outside. But when you have new blood, new people, new money flowing in, obviously that changes the game a little bit. And that brings the rarity of Bitcoin to one step closer to super rare, right? Right now, you know, and I said it the other day in the other podcast, but I think it's one of my favorite things I've ever said is only 21 million people can ever own one Bitcoin, ever. Right. And we already know that that's not even possible because how many people own a little bit of Bitcoin and how many people own a lot of Bitcoin? And that changes how many people can actually hold one Bitcoin. Now, there's right as we know it, there's always sellers, you know, that may not be the case always. Anyways, but, you know, Libra's in the news right now. We're going to have a chat about that. I also want to get a little insight from Frank here shortly about, you know, how he views the space. You know, he's been covering this for some time. I think, you know, he told me 2016 is when he really started covering the space at a high level. And he's a really credible and awesome journalist, you know, and you can check out their website. I think it's called theblockcrypto.com, but we'll get specific on that in a second. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and bring Frank on so we can get it actually from his mouth and his words. But everybody, make sure that, you know, if you're watching, if you have some questions, or if you want to, you know, give me a comment about the show, send a message, joe@bitcoinradio.com. You can also contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You know, we're everywhere you want to be, right? And YouTube, of course. All right. So without further ado, you know what time it is. We're bringing on Frank. Welcome, Frank. What's going on, man?
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Dude, it's a pleasure.
WBTC. That's a great. Reminds me of old Radiohead days. WFUV, WBTC.
Exactly, man. Actually, you know, I got to give some credit over to the team. Josh Donaldson, who's the executive producer of the show, he actually came up with that concept. And you know, we were talking about because he was West Coast and I'm East Coast, I guess you could say, in the South. And I guess on the West Coast, it's actually called like Q.
Yeah.
It was really weird. He was like QBTC. I'm like, what? Why would it call Q? It's W.
WB, yeah, that's right.
And so I was like, I'd never even heard that before. Anyways, but back to you, Frank. How's it going, man?
Can't complain. It's been a fun day. Mostly, I haven't really written anything today. I've been in and out of meetings, but obviously with Libra in the news and the getting some notes from some of the over-the-counter trading desk on why they think we're, you know, down 8 some odd percent. It's funny. I was supposed to have drinks with one over-the-counter trading desk head tonight, and I texted him. I said, "Hey, are we still on?" He said, "Frank, look at the market." No.
Oh man,
so it's a busy day here at the Block, and excited to be here to chat about what we're doing.
Well, since you're in the news business, you know, they always say any news is really good news because you're impartial to it. You're somebody who just needs things to happen one way or the next. To an extent, obviously, I'm sure you have some skin in the game and you want Bitcoin to be successful. Clearly, you're the company that you're with, the Block, relies on crypto being relevant to some extent. But let's kind of get some background on you first, Frank. Like who are you? Where are you from? How'd you get into crypto?
Well, it's funny. Just real quick, back when I was in radio, we always tried to avoid the when it bleeds, it leads. So typically in news, you know, it's not just is any news good news, but bad news in particular is
absolutely
good news for reporters. And it's when people actually start paying attention and start clicking to read stories. But we try to avoid that here at the Block of
good for you.
Well, no, in as much as we like to put context around it. So it's not just hyperbolic nonsense and noise. We aren't covering price all day, every day. We're covering the builders and the movers and the shakers who are doing things that are impacting the space, just not hunting for the easy story that will get the clicks. But in any respect,
well said.
from my perspective, where I come from, how I got into crypto was kind of by accident. I was at Business Insider. Most of my day was spent getting research notes from some of the investment banks on different stocks, and I do a quick market hit on what those notes said. It would be a thesis on why Macy's would outperform in whatever quarter, and
Sure.
I'd write up a 200-word, 300-word news story on that. After a couple months, I started shifting into writing about high-frequency trading, exchanges, market structure. My background before that, I was at NASDAQ in marketing, so I knew about the trading worlds from that perspective. And one day, after covering a lot of markets and a lot of market structure, I was sort of, having my monthly, or maybe it was a bi-monthly meeting with my editor, and he said, all right, you've been covering a lot of market structure, fintech. How do you feel about covering this Bitcoin stuff that was going on?
Oh, wow.
It was trading up above 1,000 for the first time in a while, and kind of garnering a lot of attention and a lot of traffic. And there wasn't a designated reporter at Business Insider at the time outside of one guy who was covering just literally the price, at least in the US. They didn't even so much as ask me. I say, you're going to have to now cover this. And so it was a simple.
So let me pause you. So what was your prior, I guess, what was your understanding of Bitcoin? Did you even take it seriously at that moment?
Well, no, absolutely not. So I remember my immediate reaction was, I am starting out my career as a financial journalist. I don't want to cover magic internet money all day.
Yeah, sure.
I remember as I sort of got on the beat, my coverage of traditional markets to Bitcoin went from, let's say, 90% to 10% to almost the other way around within a few months. And I remember in mid-2017 thinking, well, this is just so embarrassing. Here I am. Everything I'm writing about is about this Bitcoin stuff.
Yeah, dude, you're probably like embarrassed. Like, what are you making me write about this for?
Oh yeah, no, it was
Offended.
Painful because there were so many like boring traditional market structure stories I wanted to write about.
Of course.
CBOE shaking up their trading structure, whatever the story was, or IEX launching a listings business. I mean,
Sure.
These are really big issues. But that's where I wanted to make my name in. Funny enough, that's not what fate had stored. And ultimately, I kind of saw the two worlds coalescing. So around late 2017, as we all know, CBOE was doing futures, CME was doing futures. I had heard, heard about many of the different high-frequency trading firms who had been in the space for a while, firms like Virtu and XR Trading in Chicago and Jump Trading. And those stories hadn't really broken yet of these large players in equities markets kind of making a big splash into crypto. I broke that Jane Street, for instance, which is a huge trader of ETFs and equities. I broke that they were trading in the market. And now I know that they're actually a source, or rather a hub, of where a lot of this retail flow ends up going to, where they systematically internalize it. But anyway, long story short, too late. Started off not being interested in it. And then when I saw that all of the large market structure players that I was writing about, the exchanges, the high frequency trading firms, once I saw them like building, graphical, GUI, so to speak, and businesses around this thing, it really captured my attention. By the time, even post the bubble popping, I was super intrigued by looking at how Bitcoin would be of import to the exchanges and the trading firms, and watching that narrative of institutionalization progress. And what's been great is it hasn't necessarily been a straight line of money flowing in and adoption, but a lot of different complicated stories panning out, and it's been fun to watch. But definitely didn't start off loving it. I kind of fell in love with the space and the excitement, not so much the Bitcoin itself, but I can't imagine covering anything else at this moment.
No, it's a great storyline. Okay, so let me ask you, how long did it take you from that moment of you're covering blockchain now to I bought into Bitcoin for the first time? What was that moment? Like, how long was that?
So I only bought Bitcoin so that I could write a story about how to use a Bitcoin ATM.
Okay. And
I sort of view my career exposure to the space as owning Bitcoin.
Sure.
In the block by that, in that regard, by dedicating my life and career up to this point, or at least for the past 3 years, to writing and covering the people and companies in the space, I, in a sense, view myself as owning a great deal of Bitcoin without actually owning that much.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I like that answer, and I can relate to that in a lot of ways as a community leader of my own or myself. I see the space as very important just on a personal level, let alone what I do professionally. But I think it's a really intriguing and really exciting way of being introduced, man. I mean, you come in here, you're like a little disappointed at like this new beat you've been put on, and next thing you know, you've blossomed into something that you've been able to help establish the block crypto. Your website is the block crypto.
The block.
.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's the block is the actual.
The block URL was taken.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, it's a pretty short and simple URL. I can imagine how much that would be, how much it would cost, let alone if it was available. Nevertheless, okay. So from that moment, you've kind of been able to establish yourself. I clearly, have been able to look at what you guys have done over the time, and you've broken a lot of stories. You put yourself out there. You've been bold. You've been really credible, and that's something that's been missing in this space quite a bit. So, what is it you see right now that is really bringing down what people really want to read? Like, I feel like the space is still so immature that the bad news or even just mild news is just put aside, and and people just want to read something that's going to make them feel good. Like, hey, my coin's going to go up. But you've taken a different approach to this. So let's kind of talk about that philosophy.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when we started this journey over a year ago, we saw the desire for real in-depth coverage of the space that went beyond just saying X person's price target for Bitcoin or Y person's reason for why they think Bitcoin's rat poison. And we saw, all right, maybe that's driving clicks, but there's so much information that people want. There's for that we fill that gap. And it's really taken on a life of its own. In recent months, in my seat, I do a lot of writing in addition to working with our other writers on their stories. I've been trying to bring in voices from the traditional financial world and Wall Street world to frame things in our space that shows that we don't operate in a vacuum. For instance,
absolutely,
we've seen how many of the equity brokers have brought their fees down to zero, which is an interesting story. It's a trend that's been playing out since online brokers have really come into existence. And there's a parallel story in crypto where we see the fees actually increasing. And so we wrote a story about how that basically examined how, while we have equity brokers bringing their fees down to zero, the opposite is playing out in crypto, and kind of bringing those two worlds together. And we've done a lot of different stories about that. There was a narrative going on about how Bitcoin is a safe haven, so-called safe haven asset during times of economic and political turmoil. And we, went to economists on Wall Street and try to get their opinion on whether or not that was the case. And in marrying those worlds, we're offering a unique perspective. And that's just part of it. That's kind of a lot of
What was their answer, by the way?
Well, the answer is, if you look at what a safe haven asset is, it's something like gold,
yep,
Japanese yen, and these assets that lack volatility. And
that's not Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. And while Bitcoin in the future might be a
sure
value, right now it doesn't necessarily fit all the descriptions. At the same time, we talked to
so maybe a hedge. That's what we would consider potentially
in the future, sure, but not at the moment. We don't see flows during these economic economic moments flying or driving into Bitcoin. And it's approaching the stories we write with that lens of how can we provide a really great context and insights to our readers that, whether it's looking at Bitcoin, crypto in the perspective of Wall Street or technology or politics, but really providing insights as opposed to snappy headlines, and also bringing power to account, right? Like a lot of these publications and news outlets really try to cozy up to the people that they report on, and we've done a really good job of holding power to account, asking people the tough questions.
Good.
We're not a marketing arm of your company. We are going to give you hell in some respects and be respectful about it. But I've often asked questions of projects and companies, and they say, no one's ever really asked us those questions before. And sometimes it gets people angry, and sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. But that's sort of the entire point.
Yeah, dude. Me and Patrick McLean, who's the CEO and co-founder of Mousebelt, who's the parent company of Bitcoin Radio. We were just having this conversation recently about how, I mean, even I need to be a little bit more bold in the way that I speak to certain projects or companies, and we got to start, representing and taking accountability for our own words and our own, things. And not that we've done anything wrong. We just want to be a little bit more assertive in that manner. Now, I think as important as this is for crypto, it's even more important for the future of crypto, because the people who are in, typically you don't get into crypto and just get out completely. If you buy into crypto, you're down the rabbit hole. And I mean, you might just be holding and maybe even at a loss, but you tend to stay, that's just my experience. I mean, there might be a certain percentage that doesn't stick around for longer than, a 10% dip, but there's a big percentage that does. And with that being said, it's not really them that we're trying to convince of anything, or them that it's really worried about a lot of news, because they're just either holding or they're trying to, get their coin to go up. But for anybody to take this space seriously, that's credible, from the outside looking in, I mean, it's hard to look at the media in crypto and say you're doing a good job. So
I think that's a really good point, Joe. And it explains why some of our strongest pushback in terms of some of the stuff we've written about has come from those really extreme, might be too negative of connotation, but those folks who are really ingrained into the space, the maximalists, so to speak, have hit us the hardest with certain coverage. Whereas the outsiders, the people who are working at X technology companies, blockchain unit, or the small crypto unit of a firm like TD, or the small crypto unit at a firm like Visa or MasterCard, they love our coverage because they see that they're in depth and then we're asking the tough questions. Whereas the ETH heads or the Bitcoin maximalists on crypto Twitter are often the ones who are hitting us the hardest. But what's great is it's the former group, not the latter, that are actually paying us money for our content. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, at the end of the day, we kind of have to bunker down and ignore.
And the haters make you famous, man. Didn't you know?
The haters make you stronger.
Sure.
So
I mean, look, and of course, this is not a political statement whatsoever, but I mean, this is not a secret on that note as well. But Donald Trump got more coverage from his haters than he did from anybody else during 2016, and it's probably going to continue. Now, that's true for both parties in a lot of ways. Trump's campaign was a little bit was overly, exaggerated on the not on. Again, not a political statement. I'm not making a statement about that, but more so on how much people were actually tweeting bad things about him. It just went everywhere, every day. I mean, CNN at one point, before he was even a candidate, already had like a Trump section for like 2 days, about, just so you can click on it and get Trump news, So, I mean, I use that example to say, the bad news oftentimes is what will make you really relevant.
Yeah, I think that might have been our Kickstarter in the beginning. We were putting out stories that were very intense, high impact, ruffled feathers, and we kind of came on the scene as this maybe nuisance or annoyance to some people. But if you look at the totality of our coverage now, being that we're a year matured, I really think we've earned a lot of credibility, and that's so much now a small part of our brand. Are those sorts of stories, and we're kind of just trying to be the record of account, so to speak. And but in the beginning, we were definitely we were kind of scrappy, right? And people would attack us on Twitter. Now we're reaching an interesting phase. I won't name names, but people have realized that they actually can't come out and attack us directly, and so they'll reach out to their investors who might have on Twitter, and then they'll sort of speak out against a given piece of reporting.
But dude, that means you've made it, bro. Right? Like when you have that type of influence, or that it's that important that people need to do that. So let's kind of move into like
me. It's the entire group.
Of course, yes. And that's the block as a total entity. But you have a big part in that, as you are, the director of news, at this. And I think that as the block has matured over the last year and a half, you guys have been putting yourselves in a position to be something in the space, to be taken seriously. What have been some of the bigger news stories? What have been some things that you've really that stand out in the past?
What was great in the beginning was we didn't.
And obviously there may be something you can't talk about. I completely understand, but whatever. Let's get some Easter eggs here.
Well, to speak at a higher level, in the beginning, what was so great was we didn't have this sort of. No one really wanted to be on the block in the first few months, let's say.
Sure.
So we weren't getting a strong pipeline of inbounds from public relations firms and companies like outside of a small few in the beginning of companies saying, hey, I want to be on the block. Here's the story I want to tell. So we had, in a sense, a lot of free time, right? So we had a lot of free time to dig into companies and do really deep investigative reporting.
Sure.
And so in those first few months, we were breaking stories like Base is shutting down. We were breaking stories like Blockchain Terminal, which was a huge investigation into this ICO that raised $30 million. The founder had changed his name, changed his identity to conduct a sale, and the head of it was from AllianceBernstein, which is a major Wall Street firm, but it was a lot of smoke and mirrors. And it was a really great story. We had, and there were a few other examples during that early period. We had broken that Bitfinex had lost its banking relationships, and we were being cited. I mean, 2-3 months in, in Wall Street Journal, Reuters, that basis story in particular, we were sourced in mainstream publications like the Financial Times, Reuters, et cetera. We still have that. That's still at our heart. We do a lot of that reporting, but it went from being 100% of what we did to maybe 20%, because now we're getting press releases where companies respect us and want to talk to us and do Q&As, and so we've definitely grown up. But in the beginning, it was a lot of that. Me showing up at bars in Midtown at 12 a.m., 1 a.m. to talk to sources who felt uncomfortable speaking on the phone for a given story. And that was a lot. That was a lot of the early days.
Of course. I mean, I can imagine the amount of stories you've actually turned down compared to what you've been able to write is just astronomical in the amount of information that comes in from this source or that or whatever it might be.
I think I've written close to 500 stories.
Wow. Wow.
For sure. Some of them are like a couple hundred words, but
that's a lot of, that's a lot of credibility that you are putting on the line for every story. That's something else that people don't realize about journalists, and I'm not a professional journalist. I'm just somebody who likes to talk about crypto and blockchain, and I make posts, and I have a community that lets me know of all the drama, right? And it's pretty basic and very amateur, but even for me, I've had to learn some very difficult and hard lessons about what you can and what you can't talk about. Listen, that responsibility is huge.
And sourcing is not an easy thing. Like when we report on deals, that's the hardest thing to get right, because let's say Bitcoin Radio is getting acquired by the block, right? Let's say that were to happen in some parallel universe. Question is, well, how far are the discussions? What's the offer? Is this close? Is it in the process of closing? Well, and an outlet that doesn't have the sort of the journalistic know-how to get that story right will likely budget up. And so, and we've had lessons on that. I've messed up a story since being at the block. My funniest mess up, I was embarrassed when it happened, but it was an honest mistake, so I'm not afraid to talk about it. But I had heard about a gentleman leaving Google to join BACT, which Intercontinental Exchanges,
of course,
crypto venture. So I heard that this guy, I forget his name, but let's say it was Joe Peterson, had joined the company from Google. So I reported on that. It was right. It was a good story, except I had gotten the wrong Joe Peterson.
Oh,
Google. So there were two Joe Petersons at Google who basically worked around the same time and did the same sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So you had to issue a correction. And, whenever we issue a correction, we issue it. We're very honest about it.
Dude, at least his name was Joe Peterson, though. that's at least understandable.
It was a very honest mistake, but it was still a mistake.
Fair.
We don't want to.
No, of course not. You want to minimize and get rid of any mistakes, and that goes for most people, I think, who take their jobs very seriously. Well, let's jump into some hot topics today, and specifically with Libra. I guess Zuckerberg, old Zuck himself, has made a statement, or I guess I don't know if this came from Zuck or from Facebook as a whole, but that they would not pursue Libra if the U.S. wasn't behind it, if the regulators said no. Is that a lot of that just some compliance publicly so that it looks like they're doing their job? I don't know. I go back and forth on what I think about what Libra is going to be. I got positives and negatives, and I think that Libra could be very, very powerful, and the government knows that. But you're getting probably as a whole, the block is probably receiving a lot of information on this. What's your overall concept and conception of what's happening in Congress at the moment?
Well, so I was actually speaking to my really good friend who's a reporter in Washington, and we were talking about that this morning. She had a really good point. My question was, it seems like my first instinct while I was talking this morning was, this is likely not going to happen. Like the thing that they're trying to achieve, getting hundreds of companies together to form this association, to create a new way for billions of people to interact
Sure.
peer-to-peer with a new type of money, is something that's so far along. Why would the regulators even want to waste their time bringing this guy in and asking him questions? And her point was, in the past, they've kind of played this wait to regulate approach until the thing's in place.
Sure.
And then what happens? You have Cambridge Analytica, and you have issues that, of misinformation being spread. And so Facebook has proven that every time it tries to do something big, it kind of flubs up. And so they're trying to get ahead of that. And so it seems like, they're kind of being unreasonable, but they're just trying to avoid the idea of Facebook, which already has this image rather of being too powerful. How do we make sure that people's money doesn't get harmed in this process of them trying to try something new, which is a reasonable thing. Another source in DC told me that there's kind of a divide shaping up between the Republicans and the Democrats, in which the Republicans actually are coming off a little pro Libra to kind of stick it to the Democrats in a
Interesting
market type of situation. And you've seen leading Democrats like Maxine Waters and I think Crapo and Brown, the two other senators who are on the Financial Services Committee of the Senate. Pretty sure they're both also Democrats. Whereas the one letter that was sent from the Senate to sort of in any case, it was a letter
Sure.
from a Republican senator. So you've kind of seen that partisan divide shape out over Libra.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this Libra discussion, just in general, to me, is that again, I have conflicting opinions. For one, putting aside any Bitcoin as a theory, Bitcoin, what it stands for, what it is, because everybody has a different view of that. I know what I personally believe about Bitcoin, and if I remove what Bitcoin is, and if I remove the blockchain idea, Libra to me is a very intriguing and exciting opportunity for the world. Now, with that being said, as an American, as someone who enjoys the benefits of having the US dollar as the world currency, I personally, on a little selfish level, I'm like, this could be a little bit interesting because, we enjoy the lifestyle and the economy we do because of how well accepted and how brilliant the US dollar has performed over the course of the world, right? It's accepted in just about every major country. I can't imagine it not being accepted. I've traveled the world on every continent besides Antarctica and really Australia. But besides those, I've never run into a place that I can't exchange my dollar. And I'm very proud and very happy to be an American. But now we have this idea that on the internet, everybody's the same, that it's a very individualistic place, and that the free market does somewhat exist. There are some, I guess you could say, some rules on the internet that everybody in every country, abides by their own, regulations. But the internet money compared to Bitcoin, like this is Libra's internet money. Bitcoin is a lifestyle. It's a theory. It's a way of politically thinking and biasing yourself. But Libra is just a way to pay. And that scares me a little bit because I enjoy the American lifestyle that I do. Now, as a free thinker, this is great for somebody who's in Africa. This is great for somebody who's in sub-Saharan Africa specifically, or in middle of China, who needs to be able to do something without the government being involved, right? What do you see Libra as a whole? And of course, a lot of this will be opinion and not necessarily the block's representation. But what are your thoughts?
I think it's fascinating and curious that Facebook would do this, given how the reputational risk, the regulatory risk they expose themselves to by doing this. So clearly, the people working on the project, if they're going to push this ahead to get the upper echelons of Facebook to get on board with this, it must be something they believe will be transformative to human society. As a journalist, I often try to put my skeptical glasses on, so to speak. Will this change the lives of billions of people? I don't necessarily know. The jury's still out, right? I mean, how do you create the different on-ramps for people to even get Libra? Are they going to airdrop it? Which countries will it really be accepted in? I mean, I'm pretty sure early reports in the beginning had said that it wouldn't be available in China and India. Well, how many people are you really going to help if it's banned in certain jurisdictions, especially large jurisdictions with billions of people where a lot of the world's most impoverished reside?
Sure.
I don't know how much headway you make. On ramps, it not being available in some of the places with the most impoverished folks. So there are challenges and there are impediments to it. I don't know if that gets to your question precisely, but those are just some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's relevant, obviously.
And then, because of my background covering market structure and to a degree, the SEC and the CFTC and different trading regulations, when you think of the structure of what Libra is this a security in some sense? Does it mimic the structure of a mutual fund or an ETF? And how does that then, do you regulate that, and who regulates it? And
so is the Libra, the co-Libra, I guess, the digital token itself, is that something that can increase in value?
Calibra is the wallet company, so to speak.
Okay.
It's creating infrastructure around Libra, the token, which is managed by the Libra Association, which is made up of different entities and players. And the Libra token itself, that's a good question. I'm pretty sure it maintains a level of stability.
That's how I understand it too.
As much as other currencies, global currencies, maintain a level of stability outside of Venezuela.
Sure.
Peso.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think about this too. Like as I read it, and of course, I'm not an expert in Libra. I've kind of been waiting for it to be, it's relevant for sure. Obviously, it's big news, but I've been waiting. I've had doubts from the moment that it came out that the U.S. was going to allow this, right? Especially because they're based in the U.S. Now, if Facebook was based out of Switzerland or somewhere else, I would be a lot more.
The biggest concern that the folks on Capitol Hill have about Libra is the fact that the association that manages it,
sure, is in
Australia, Switzerland.
Yep.
So that's a big concern of theirs. It's one of the paramount concerns, actually.
Well, go ahead.
More comfortable if this thing was. It was funny, I never thought of this as being an issue, but one senator, when I was there for the first hearing, or maybe it was a congressman, because there was 2 hearings, I just don't remember, asked, well, why? I think he was a Southern legislator. He's like, why don't you want American jobs why don't you want to create American jobs for this thing? I was like, that's interesting that's your big concern, because, me thinking Facebook's this giant, many people view it as this giant evil corporation. The factor not of whether this thing creates a couple hundred or so American jobs should be the least of your concern. But
however, on those clips when he's trying to get reelected, he can be clipped saying that. So I would imagine maybe that was his goal.
Yeah, maybe it's a political play, but that was actually one of the bigger concerns, was whether or not.
That's crazy, though. I agree. Like that sounds ridiculous, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Too bad he was from the South. I hate that. I would make fun of him more, but I gotta represent.
I don't know why I'm picking on the South. I have no reason to, but I think he was just a classic, America First type.
Hey, for sure. Okay, so let me interject this statement, I guess, or question, sort of. But assuming where the blockchain space is now, 10 years from now, we flash forward, we expect it to improve, especially Bitcoin. We've got a lot of coins and projects that are dying or are already dead, and some that'll rise out of the ashes like a phoenix. And you've got a whole brand new space to kind of scale, right? And that's the blockchain, as a space. Now, I see this as we're still at the ground floor. It's the mass adoption effect is not whether or not people are using Bitcoin to make payments. In fact, I'm not a proponent of someone who thinks that Bitcoin should be the next US dollar. That's not what I always think. I think Bitcoin is a store of value and should be viewed as such and treated as such on a public level. Now, I wish the rest of people that I interact with and do crypto with would at least agree to some sort of that. But most people are really uneducated on the exact reasons why Bitcoin should or could exist for long periods of time. Now, that being said, here's kind of my statement is, moving forward, based off of your experience, based off of the things that you've witnessed in different markets and the Wall Street's opinion, Is this becoming more and more something that you expect them to get involved in, or is it kind of tapering off now? The hype's over. It's not as exciting. We haven't run back up to the all-time high yet. And without that, are these companies still going to invest in Bitcoin? Do they see this as a value price? Do they see this as something that they should get in? What are your? I know that's a lot of information to digest there, but
well, I think the premise of your question is correct, which is we're definitely at the ground floor. The second question would be, do we get to the second level or first level, second level, third level of the house? That remains to be seen. But at the ground floor, you can see that, and we have research that came out today, that 40 some odd % of the current of the workforce of this space is at exchanges. So it shows that
wow,
the only provable business model lies in speculation, right? In speculation on these tokens, the actual projects themselves, and the companies built around these projects have a very small percentage of the workforce. And there's a chance, a probability that in 10 years' time, the speculation becomes a smaller source of the job force and of the market, and the projects and use cases that are being developed will have real viability.
I mean, we can only hope, right?
We can only hope. And yeah, I mean, of course, like when I think about all the companies that are out there building on different things and they're trugging along, moving forward with the different use cases they've built out, only time will tell. I think something like Facebook has been really beneficial in bringing crypto and digital assets to the forefront of regulatory thinking. That could prove to be either very beneficial or very negative, depending on how they decide to regulate, if it's a super hard approach or soft touch. And we shall see. But
I think there's a big difference, though, in what Facebook's trying to do and what Bitcoin is doing.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge divide in what the goals and ambitions of the Bitcoin ecosystem or Bitcoin space are with Libra. But
like, who does Congress call in on Bitcoin's side? Like, what are they going to do when they want to talk to the Zuckerberg of Bitcoin, like Satoshi?
Yeah, they'll probably bring in the different like trade groups or entities that represent space, and there are companies that are built around Bitcoin, like Blockstream and
Coinbase.
Coinbase probably is another one. So they'll be calling those folks to better understand it. But that's the point. The point I'm making is because of Facebook, they are talking to those people and they are asking questions about what a stablecoin is, what are the potential stablecoins. Oh, if that's what a stablecoin is, then how is it different from Bitcoin? And having folks in power know that all this different stuff is going on and giving them the opportunity to ask questions is a big step forward for a space that kind of came out of the cypherpunk libertarian world. The question you originally asked was, is there still energy? Is there still vibrancy? And I would say absolutely, just given how much it's captured the public's attention and the attention of folks who are on the periphery of the industry itself. I think that's
a great point and very well said. I appreciate that style of explanation too, and I really like the way that you put that out there, among many things. And I know our time's running shorter, so I'll try to make these next couple questions relatively quick. But I love like what the block says about themselves. As in your mission statement, so we are the first and final word in digital assets. I mean, that's a really powerful statement. It's a little bold. It's kind of minimizing others, I think, in some ways, but really enhancing yours and not intentionally hurting anybody else's feelings. But I don't disagree with that statement. I think that you guys have brought about a level of stability in news that's expected on the outside and necessary for new money, new blood, and new interest to show up, right? So going forward, as the block, also evolves into this space, where do you see the block over the next year to 2 years?
So when we think about
and why don't you have a show? You'll need to have a TV show. I know you got a podcast. Sorry.
Yeah, we have a great podcast. I don't say that just because
The Scoop. Yeah,
your listeners should definitely check it out.
Absolutely, I would highly recommend it.
We try to bring on outside voices, like people like Marty Chavez, who's the CFO of Goldman Sachs, who isn't necessarily a Bitcoin enthusiast, but who is a smart guy who has decades of experience in electronic trading and Wall Street, who can share insights that are important to folks in the Bitcoin space. And so that's what the scoop's been all about. So hopefully, yes, we continue to build that out and have more listeners.
Cheddar TV, right? That's what we need.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's enough money to be made in television.
Not yet.
But people keep telling us that we do need to do more video. I think we will continue to be driven by this North Star of holding power to account, being tough on the industry, and holding ourselves to an incredibly high standard of precision, almost to a point of psychosis. We really are tough on ourselves. That's one aspect of it. Being first is another aspect of it. And the final word aspect is very important as well. So we break the news story or the scoop on whatever development, but then we tell our readers, whether it's our Genesis subscribers, in longer form, detailed research where we dig into data, what the final story is. What should you take away from this? So sure, give you a perfect example, actually. We didn't break the story. We might have been one of the first to break that Circle was spinning out Poloniex.
Sure.
We got that story out. We were first the news. And then a few days later, I wrote up a 1,000-word column on what that means and contextualized it and offered sort of the analysis behind that news.
Was it y'all who broke the Justin Sun interest potentially?
Yeah, we broke that story.
That's cool, man. Hey, look, throw a dog a bone, man. Next time you have some information like that, just let me be second. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, fair enough. Definitely.
Obviously, I'm very proud of that, and what you guys have done has been exceptional. And I continue to, as I learn more and been able to read more about you guys, I've been nothing but enthusiastic about where your news agency is going, and it's necessary. And I'm so proud to be able to see this for future people getting into crypto. This is the first place people need to be sent to.
I agree.
Cheers. Yes. Okay. So let's move in and we'll wind it down here. And I do a quick fire with my guests, at the end, and they're a little bit off topic, but it's fun. And we get to see a little bit. Yeah. We get to see who Frank is. Right. So we'll start off. It's my favorite question I like to ask everybody. I mean, there's no wrong answers to these. They can be yes or no's, or that you can answer it the way you want to. Right. If you want to pass. I'll be mad at you if you pass, but you're allowed to. It's your right. And it's my right to be frustrated with you. So don't pass. Right. I'm just joking. Okay. I'm not joking. But here it is. First question is aliens. In 200,000 years of human existence, do you believe aliens have ever contacted or been part of planet Earth? Human existence.
Yeah, I don't think that would be unreasonable to believe that.
And one of the points I like to make with people is the reason why I ask about humans is because, the Earth is 4 billion years old. Aliens could have flown by right by Earth when it was a molten ball and be like, whatever, nice orange ball there. But now we got water, life sustains obviously for many years. But so yes, right?
I don't think much about aliens, but I would say it's unreasonable to think that they don't exist. But I don't give them much thought.
Okay, fair. All right, next question: Bitcoin as a political party, yes or no?
Is Bitcoin a political party?
Bitcoin as a political party, yes or no?
Oh, I certainly think I've thought about this. I certainly think you could unite many diverse groups of people around Bitcoin. You can just look historically around.
Absolutely. Money.
Yes, around money and how you think about money. But even if you think about how the Republican Party came to rise in the 1980s, they all sort of coalesced around that new right movement, which was heavily ingrained in evangelicalism. Most Republicans are not evangelical, but there's kind of like this core to the party. And I think you could coalesce a wide range of folks around this idea of Bitcoin, and it could be a viable political movement. It wouldn't be a huge one, but you could definitely win an election off of Bitcoin.
I agree
with Yang to an extent, where so many people are moving around him, and I'm sure tons of people have very little insight or care to about his other policy prescriptions, but just because he's into Bitcoin, they are kind of moving around him. So
there's millions of people that have interest in him now that otherwise wouldn't care.
I think so. I think that's a good question, though.
Yeah, and another thing about Yang too is, and I've got respect for Yang. I tend to try to be libertarian in principle, and I have my own, fiscally, I feel a certain way, socially I feel a certain way, but Yang, I think, isn't going away, number one, and number two, whether he's successful this year or not capturing the Democratic nomination, I could absolutely see him being very, very relevant for the next 8 to 10 years, in politics and to some degree. So I look forward to seeing what he does and how he matures and how he grows. And maybe he gets elected to, be the next president. Who knows? But either way, I'm paying attention. Right. So, but moving on to the next question is this, unless you have a statement. I didn't know if you, okay. Next question is this. And again, I want to make it clear this is impartial. You get to answer the way you want to answer. And I have no qualms with those answers. But with that being said, Bitcoin has been very successful when you think about it from the beginning. But Bitcoin, is it going to hit $1 million, or can it hit $1 billion, reasonably speaking?
Can Bitcoin hit $1 million? If there are enough people that want to buy it relative to people who want to sell it,
sure.
I think that is plausible. I don't think people should expect that to happen.
And I know you already said that as Block as a whole stays away from speculating and price talk. And this is just a frank question, right?
I have no idea. I couldn't tell you.
Fair enough. Now, I like to ask the $1 million question. I mean, some people say yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know why those people are so sure.
John McAfee says it's just simple math.
He also said he's going to eat his cock if it doesn't. So he says a lot of things.
Yes, he did. And then he also said he was going to contract it out to a sex worker in Thailand. But but I actually just had him on recently, and I enjoy his conversations quite a bit because they're always entertaining. All right.
I used to have his phone number, and when I first was in this space, I must have been reporting on this space for a couple of weeks, and I called him. I'll never forget. It was like 7 p.m. at night. The office was gone. I'm hunched over in the corner asking John McAfee, questions about Bitcoin. And
that's awesome, man. That's really cool.
I never ran a story on that interview because it wasn't anything. There was no there, but it was very intense.
Yeah, and I really do believe this about John. John's not an idiot. John's a high level thinker. He likes to get drunk, and I think he probably has done a lot of drugs in his day. But John is relatively smart, and I think that he actually, he says things like Bitcoin's going to go to $1 million, and if it doesn't, that's okay. But the tension that it brings and the amount of marketing that does for him is well worth it. I mean, I don't see a day that goes by without someone referencing the $1 million John McAfee statement.
Oh.
Okay, so final question, and we'll cut it off here. But biggest influence in the crypto space for you personally?
Oh, my biggest influence in the crypto.
And if you got more than one, I understand that. I don't want to discount or take away your ability to credit others.
That's a good question. Who do I look up to?
Sure, whatever that question means to you. The biggest influence that's been there for you, or that you've looked up to, or whatever it might be.
In the space, I think there are many people who are influential. Nobody that I sort of view as being my
hero or anything.
Hero.
It's not John McAfee.
Unfortunately, John, I'm sorry. It's not John, to John. It's not.
Yeah, fair. Understand. Okay, and that's an appropriate answer. If everybody's just awesome, and for the most part, or not awesome, I can relate.
It's just there are individuals who aren't as public who I think are amazing people who don't seek that level of publicity, who I really think are incredible human beings and who drive me to do my job as well as I like to think that I do it. But they're not necessarily the big star names, but there are quite a few, quote unquote, consigliaries who I turn to.
Fair. And I have to respect that. There's no doubt. Well, Frank, that ties it up for me here on my end. Do we miss anything? Anything that I need to give a shout out to? And where can people find you?
Where can they find me? They can find me at fintech Frank on Twitter. And then, of course, the block crypto.com is where my writing can be found. And that's where you can find me.
Awesome, man. Did we miss anything?
No, I don't think so. I hope
Did you have fun?
I did.
Good, man. Good. I'm still getting the hang of this podcasting thing. I've been doing live videos for a long time, and now the podcasting requires a little bit more structure and questions, pre-questions, and missing questions. And it's like, oh man, how do I even get to this? So it's a lot of fun, and I think we got everything on the table.
I think you hit it. You hit it pretty well. You definitely had to think about some of those, like the influential one, and No, it was interesting.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I hope that that interesting coming from a reporter like yourself is not a negative, right? I mean, you can always reporters have a way of shaping things.
Well, what I liked about this conversation was it was less about. Often when I go on, Yahoo Finance or Cheddar, they ask me
Sure.
about, like the things that I'm writing about. So like Libra or let's say Coinbase does something. So I'm commenting on specific news events as opposed to like these personal questions about my business and my life. So
Sure, man.
it's kind of a. I
Well,
hope
you're a star, Frank.
I don't approach it too analytically.
No, you did a great job, and I appreciate your answers and your insight too, man.
Thanks.
No, you did a great job. And look for this is WBTC where Bitcoin lives, right? And so where Bitcoin lives is home, and that's home for you, and that's home for me, and everybody who listens. So we make it nice and comfy, and it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be engaging. It's supposed to be interesting, and we want to know about you. And if it's not you, who else is gonna do it, right?
Yeah,
So
I'm talking about myself.
that's how I like to make sure that I remind people that if Frank Chaparro, if you're not doing this, who would you rather be sitting in Frank's seat? I mean, if it's not you, it's somebody else, and that somebody else could be somebody who's in Washington trying to destroy Bitcoin, right? So everybody who's doing this has grinded. If you're in a spot where it's very highly wanted, or you're getting paid to do it, somebody else wants that job, or for the most part. And if somebody else wants that job, that means that there's competition, and that competition is going to lead to a better Bitcoin.
No, people want my job. It's pretty thankless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is no longer thankless. I am so thankful for you. All right. Look, until next time, WBTC, you know where you're at. Take care of the cryptoverse. It belongs to all of us. And if you aren't going to do it, who else will? We'll see you soon.
Cheers.